people who are in the sciences and engineering or STEM in general, they're very focused on the technical aspects of what they're doing, and they shy away from opportunities to talk about their research and what they're interested in. And often I hear, I hate public speaking. And what that means to me is you need to practice it even more. So we have to take the approach of exposing ourselves to our fear in order to overcome it. So I encourage all of you to take every opportunity you have as part of CBB and as part of your whatever college or university you are enrolled in, to take any science communication training class that you can, to practice public speaking, to present posters, to give talks, do all of the things that will force you to become more comfortable with talking about yourself and talking about your work and your goals and vision for yourself. These are all extremely important skills to take the time to do now when the stakes are much lower. So you can make mistakes and it's not going to be the end of the world, but it gives you a chance to get feedback, and people who actually care about your success will give you honest feedback, and that will enable you to take that confidence to the next opportunity to give a speech or a talk or a poster. So the other piece of this is that when you're at conferences or even just within CBB, this is your big chance to build your network. And the absolute reality of life is that who you know matters. And if people like you, it matters even more. So be aware that what you're doing right now is to find all of those people who will be your peers in the future, who can be your potential mentors, and not just in your own research lab. You know, look for people that you can bounce ideas off of, and people that can help you in a way that's, you know, outside of your usual cadre of people that you talk to. And it's just always good to have an objectivity when you're thinking about your research and what your next steps are going to be. The other thing that you can do now is learn more about who funds the kind of research that you want to be doing. So if you're unclear about whether your work falls within the National Science Foundation, or whether it's going to be industry focused, or some other DoD or some other big government agency, that's really useful to do now, because you have the opportunity to sit in on a lot of webinars and symposia, and to attend you know, virtual meetings. All of this kind of thing is at your disposal now, and I highly recommend that you learn as much as you can now to set yourself up for who you want to target as you move forward in your research career. And here we go. So, overcoming the blank page. I know that for most people, writing is not the thing you love most, but it is a skill like anything else, and it requires practice. And one thing that smart people like you often rely on is that you're really good under pressure, and you can come up with something that's going to work 9 times out of 10, and you'll get done what you need to get done to get the grade or whatever it is. But the reality is that you think you write your best under pressure, but you really don't. The best writing happens when you plan and you have time, and you can compose your thoughts and be organized in how you approach your writing. So I have here the kind of basic outline of what you should do to begin the writing process. So first of all, identify what you're excited about, and who would care that you're excited about that thing, so that then you can start to talk to other people about your ideas, and before you actually start writing about them. That'll give you time to think of the best ways to explain things. And you know, if people ask you questions, then maybe you're not expressing yourself as well as you'd like to, and you can refine that over time. Then you'll get to a point where you can actually plan to write. You're not writing yet, but you think about your environment at home. Or in your office. You know, how is that environment? Are there a lot of distractions? Can you put together a chunk of time where you can just focus on writing? all of those things are critical to being efficient when you actually sit down to write. And for those of you who are going to be writing your dissertations or a thesis or papers, things like that, having that quiet downtime becomes really important. And one thing people talk about a lot is, listening to music while they write or doing something else while they write. I found over time that the fewer distractions, the better. So I can no longer write when there's music on or anything other that's distracting. So think about that and make sure you can block time to protect that time for writing. Then you're going to think before you write. So this is the idea of, okay, what is it that I want to convey? What am I trying to convince people of? How do I want to describe my activities and why I'm the best person to do something? Or how can I describe what I've accomplished this month? And I am going to preface a lot of this by saying, I took a look at the progress reports that you all wrote, and I read all of them. And so a lot of the feedback I'm going to give you is based on my observations of reading all of the progress reports that you guys wrote. So you've thought before you've written, you've talked to other people about what you're planning on writing about. Then I want you to do something that maybe you haven't done in a very, very long time. I want you to sit down and outline what you're going to write before you write it. Coming up with an outline will save you so much time later on. A lot of us think that we can write stream of consciousness and it'll just come out perfect and we won't have to do anything. But the reality is that when you're trying to write a paper or a proposal, a grant application, even a progress report, you want to have an idea of what it is that you're going to say and the order in which you want to say it, and maybe a few bullet points that you want to cover in each of those sections. So you probably had to do that in high school, but you may have stopped doing it in college. But I do recommend that you start getting back into that habit, because it will take a lot of the stress out, and you won't have a blank page anymore. You'll actually have an outline for how you're going to approach doing that, so that you can say, today I'm just going to write this one paragraph or this one section, and you'll know that you've been successful. Once you've done that, you're going to solicit reviews from as many people as you possibly can. So I have a quote there at the bottom from the Chronicle of Higher Education that talked about 63% of graduate students who did not receive a grant had only had 1 to 3 people read their proposals. But 21% of the successful graduates had 7 or more reviewers. And for postdocs, 32% had 4 or more when they were successful. So those are pretty convincing statistics, to my mind, that having as many people give you good feedback as possible is a good idea. So you can have people at all levels giving you feedback. You can have your peers, you can have maybe senior members of your lab, you can have your mentors, you can have other people, for instance, within CBB who may not be part of your lab. You can always find people who are willing to give a review of your proposal and give you feedback on what you can do to make it even better. Take feedback as seriously as possible and rewrite. As I mentioned, people have your best interests at heart for the most part, and they want your success. So when you get feedback, try not to take it personally, take it professionally, and understand that none of us is perfect, and we all need practice in writing better. And even editors like me need editors. It's just something that is useful in the writing process. And then you're going to repeat this whole process from the outline on until you get a version that the people who are reviewing say, yep, that's a winning proposal. You can submit that and you'll do well. So the next few slides are going to talk about the feedback on your reports. And I've divided it into a couple of big areas. I'm going to talk about structure first, then I'm going to talk about style, and then I'm going to give you overall advice for how to improve the way you're writing your reports. And this applies to writing in general. So I'm just using the structure of the report feedback as a mechanism to give you some advice. So first thing that you always want to be thinking about when you're writing a report of what you've done is tell me what the goal was, and then what are the objectives that you were pursuing to achieve that goal. I'm then going to want to know what was happening before this and how did your work address the gap that may have been there, or how did you solve a problem, something along those lines, or how did you further further a research project toward its end goal. Explain your contributions and how and why they are important. Just telling me that you, did some experiment on a beam isn't enough. I need to know more about why that was important. What was that goal that you were working toward, and how did you move toward that goal? Describe your unique contributions to the collaborations you have and to the resulting publications. So if you just list that you worked with the team on something, or that this was the resulting publication, but I don't know what you contributed to that, you're missing a real opportunity to tell me more about what you're good at, what parts you contributed, and how you can take ownership for the work that you've done. Those are really important things, especially as you move forward and you build your resume, and you look to be able to say to somebody in an interview, for instance, what did you do precisely on that publication? Because goodness knows you will be asked that question at some point. Then you want to describe the next steps in the research project or process and how that's going to push you toward the overall goal. And if possible, include graphics. So graphics should always have a descriptive caption saying not just, image from microscopy. I want to know exactly what that image is showing me and why it's important. So all of those things are overall structural ideas for writing really good reports, really good proposals. All of these things would be included. And I do often hear from people that they're uncomfortable selling themselves and they feel like they're boasting, or it's just very uncomfortable to put yourself out there as a main contributor to something. But I assure you that if you don't tell me, or you can't tell me why you're the best at what you do, I'm going to assume that you're just not. And I don't want to ever have to assume that. And you don't want any reviewer to assume that either. You always want to be able to express what you did, why it was important, and why you were the person to do it. So I encourage you to practice doing that in your peer sessions, and just practicing that with your colleagues in general is a really worthwhile task. So in terms of style, this is more about how do you write. So many of you in your reports wrote in the passive voice, and I wasn't clear whether you were telling me what you actually did in the with the research, or whether you were just talking about what happened in general. So if you say things like, this experiment required that process to be done, and I'm using just general words, obviously, then I don't know whether you actually did that process. I just know that that's required to do what you did, but I'm unclear whether you did it. So please make sure that you identify work that you've done directly, so that it's very clear that those were your accomplishments and not just the accomplishments in general of your team or your lab. If possible, use the active voice. So I did this, not this was done by me, if that makes sense. Be forward thinking when you're writing these research reports. Document your outreach and educational activities. Some of you actually included photos, which was fantastic. And anytime you can photograph your research activities, especially when you're doing education with students, those are invaluable, and they can always be used in future proposals. They can be used on websites. They are essential to being able to tell a story that you can't tell as well with words. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, and it is true. So definitely document what you do with your education and outreach activities. If someone gives you a template, use it. Many of you sort of used the template that you were given, or you left things out, or you didn't respond to certain things. Sometimes page limits were obliterated, other times, it was concise and well done. So I'm always suspicious if there's very little said in any report. So be thinking about that. And as I say in the red box at the bottom, if you tell me, I didn't have time to read it over before submission, I was too busy. All I can think of is everything that you write is an example of the quality of your work. So if what you submit has errors, typos, is just poorly written or clearly hasn't been reviewed by anybody, that makes me question whether you will have the same attention to detail in your research, and you don't want to make a bad impression at any point. So please think about that. My dad, when I was a kid, always used to say, don't put my name on your paper if it's not any good. I think he didn't want my last name going on a paper because that reflected on him. And to some extent, I've kept that in the back of my mind. You know, is this something that I would be proud to have my name on and have everybody assume, or everybody know that this was my work? And the last thing is, as I said, have somebody do a quick proofread, and always open up your PDF to check your formatting before you submit it anywhere. I have seen many, many times where a PDF is created when track changes was on and it captured the track changes, so it's a mess. Or the PDF cut off a graphic or cut off a caption or whatever. So please be sure that if you submit things that you've opened them up again and looked them over to make sure that they're perfect and that they are representing your work. So here's the advice about your reports. Be sure to attend your peer meetings as often as possible. Don't view them as optional in a kind of way. Use that as an opportunity to further get to know your peers and give presentations. As I said, those opportunities are golden. Use every chance you get to improve your skills in that area. And take leadership, or at least a prominent team member role in your work. Because all of those are things that you can then write about in your reports and put on your resume as accomplishments, things that you actually did while you were in CBB and onward and throughout your career. And for no matter what, don't do the minimum required. Doing the minimum is just ill-advised. Try to always exceed expectations. You may not always, but you don't want to strive to do the bare minimum. You want to strive to exceed the bare minimum. So please think about that when you are writing your reports, so that you don't just think of it as a check mark to put in a box. You know, think of it as an opportunity to catalog your work and be proud of it. If you've won any awards, please be sure to detail why you won them. You don't want to just have the name of an award, because people outside of your group may not have any idea what that is. So tell me why it was important. If possible, you know, how many people were you competing against to win this award? Who gave it to you? Was it a peer award? Was it an award from a college or a foundation or whatever? Please make sure you tell us all about that. And then acknowledge your collaborators, because you would want them to acknowledge you too. That's a kind of a golden rule of research. Be sure to give credit where credit is due, and take credit where credit is earned. Because this often comes up, and I certainly saw it a lot with college students, and I hope it's not happening with graduate students, but I often heard people say, I don't know anybody. I don't know who I'm going to ask for my recommendations, because they hadn't taken the time to get to know their professors, to establish mentorships outside of their small group or their major. So people couldn't speak to their qualities as a potential team member or a potential researcher. So keep in mind, visibility matters, and you want to take this time to build relationships and be a good teammate. That will serve you incredibly well throughout your career. So what does it take to get an award? So for NSF fellowships, which some of you may already have, I don't know, but if you're hoping to get a graduate fellowship, winners typically had some of the following things on their CVs. So of course, a good GPA is always the case. You want to have at least one publication. Doesn't have to be first author, but please keep in mind that publishing is important and is definitely looked at when you're being evaluated for grant funding, for fellowships in general, for awards. It matters. You want to have given at least 2 to 3 poster presentations, and you want to have had at least 4 research experiences in a lab that you can point to. In terms of education, you want to at least have 1 tutoring experience or TA-ship. You want to have had 3 volunteer experiences. So again, being able to do education and outreach is a big chance for you to show people what you can do outside of your research. Ideally, you would have one internship, and then evidence of professional development, for instance, like this workshop or others that you're able to attend, that show that you're thinking about how to improve in areas outside of the lab. Because again, that's, if you're going into academia or even into industry, those are the skills that matter in success with teamwork, which you will undoubtedly have to demonstrate over time. So in writing proposals, there are some best practices, and these are sort of the basics of what you can do. As I've mentioned, start planning your submission early and practice writing regularly. The best writers talk about setting aside time on their calendars, blocked. Some people write every day. I mean, writers write every day, but you want to make sure that you don't get rusty with your writing. So keep a journal or something that enables you to track what you're doing, but also is a chance for you to practice your writing skills. You want to research who has won and what they proposed in the area that you're interested in. So for instance, if you're going to go after an NSF award, you want to look at the NSF awards database and do a search on the area of interest, or even in keywords. See who's won things and what do their abstracts look like, so that you can get an idea of whether what you're thinking about doing is novel, whether there's already quite a bit of work on it, whether there's real gaps. And of course, you do literature review and you'll know about gaps in the research. But you want to know what's been funded. Is anybody interested in the work that you are thinking about pursuing? So whether it's DOE or DOD, you can find, there are databases where you can search what's been funded in certain areas. So I encourage you to do that, and to talk to your mentors. Who's funded them? Can you look at any of their proposals just to get an idea of what they look like? Those are all really helpful things to do before you start writing. Then the 5 C's, you want every good proposal to be clear, concise, correct, compelling, and complete. So that is to say that you've followed the instructions, you've answered all the questions you need to answer, you explained your research in clear ways that everybody can understand, and you didn't leave anything out. So that's across all of your writing. Please be sure that that's the case for you. The first page, and specifically the first paragraph, are often the most important pieces you're going to write. So you want to spend your time really getting that right. And I've worked on hundreds of proposals over my career, and I can tell you that the first 1 to 5 pages are what wins you the grant. If the reviewer is not interested after page 2, your chances of getting funded are low, because they are only going to be invested in something that grabs them right away. So all of your writing should be thinking about your reader first. So tell them what you're going to describe in detail later. Get them excited about what you're doing, and really work on honing the language, getting it as crisp as possible. And that will involve giving it to reviewers as many times as you need to make sure that it's good. Because the last thing you want to do is write for 15 or 20 pages and then somebody says to you, I didn't get it, or it took a really long time for you to get to the point. Things like that. So spend the time on the first page or 2 of a proposal, and have people review that before you keep going with your writing, because you'll get more out of that if you do. Make sure that you don't overpromise. And you want to make sure that your project is doable. So if you have a limited amount of time to do something, you don't want to propose something that's going to take you years beyond what you're proposing. So that's learning how to right scope a project. And you can talk to your mentors about that, but it's a really useful skill to learn how to propose a project that you have the resources and that's human resources and financial resources and lab resources to do what it is that you want to do. So definitely ask questions about that if you have them. You want to always write for an educated layperson. And what that means is that you need to be able to show that to somebody who may not be exactly in your field. Somebody like me needs to be able to read it and understand what you're trying to do. They don't have to have exactly the technical expertise that you do, but it's super important that they can understand without a lot of jargon what it is that you're trying to tell them. If you're given guidelines for writing a proposal, please follow them. It's critical. You want to be able to address the evaluation criteria, which are the guidelines that the reviewers are going to follow to review your proposal. And you want to have somebody beforehand, as I've mentioned, review everything for formatting, grammar, spelling, all of that. Spell check isn't always right, and oftentimes you've spelled something right, but it's the wrong word. So you definitely want to have an editor look over your stuff. And by all means, submit on time. The biggest tragedy in life is when a deadline is 5 p.m. and you hit apply at 5:01 and you're dead in the water. They won't accept it. So practice now getting things done a day or two early. That's just a good best practice to follow, and it'll serve you well. I've included a link in the PDF, which obviously I'll be making available to you all after this, for a great article about why academics stink at writing. And I think you'll find some really good advice in that about how you can improve your writing from an academic standpoint. So here is an actual proposal writing process. This is different from writing a report or writing a publication. So proposal writing takes a lot of time, and it's very common to underestimate the amount of time that it does take, because you may have written other things that didn't require the amount of time, but I can promise you, you want to start early because it can take months to prepare a really good proposal. In fact, the renewal proposal that we did for Bright Beams took more than 6 months of time to write, review, rewrite, continuously improve, get critiques from an external advisory board, then take all that feedback and work on it again. It also required colleagues who could give that feedback. So the networking was super important. So all of those pieces that have to come together to put together a complex grant, center grant like CBB, you can't underestimate it. It is a big undertaking, and that applies to everything down to a single investigator grant. It really takes a lot of time. So please don't try to just throw something together because you want to get the feedback. That's going to waste people's time. It gives you a bad reputation. Don't do that. Just take the time to prepare. And if it's not ready, don't submit it. There's no harm in that. You don't have to submit if you are not proud of your product. Be sure to take into account other people's schedules. A lot of times people will write up to a deadline and think, oh, well, all the people who need to review this, or the people who need to write my letter of recommendation, they'll be able to do it at the last minute. Don't do that to people. Make sure that you give yourself ample time, and the people who need to help you, give them ample time to get you what you need to be successful on time. If you're submitting to a funding agency, you want to contact program officials at that agency ahead of time before you submit your proposal, because you're allowed to run your ideas by the people who fund you, and they can give you feedback about whether you're applying to the right program, or maybe your research would be more appropriate in a different area. These are all things that you can find out well ahead of time, rather than just taking the chance and assuming that you are in the right place and your work will be of interest to them. You also want to talk to the people at your university. So there are going to be people in your department and in your Office of Sponsored Programs or Research who help you put together budgets and all of the supplementary documentation that you need to put together a grant. So be sure to talk to them ahead of time, like I said, get their feedback so that they can help you develop a checklist of the items that you're going to need for that proposal. Could be a timeline that you'll need to follow. But all of those things are really great to know ahead of time, because proposals are so much more complex than just a description of your research. You want to be sure to think about your budget and start working on that early, because budgeting is one of the most difficult things to learn, but it's a tremendous skill to have. So you want to take the time to create your CV or your bio sketch if it's for a particular agency, and get that looked over as well to make sure it's compliant, because many times the different agencies have different styles of writing biosketches, and you want to just do that ahead of time. And we can talk about that in more detail if you have questions too. As I mentioned before, have somebody read your proposal and do it in well advance so that you can have, you can make changes if you need to based on their feedback. And you can also talk to people in your lab or other people outside of your lab who are your peers, because the collaborating labs can have some of the best critics that can help you write your research in the most effective ways. So, so again, this is where all of the networking comes into play, and the communication skills that you're going to be working on will come into play as you start writing proposals. I start with the red box, which talks about CBB. So there were more than 300 submissions for the original 2016 call for the Science and Technology Centers. 30 of those 300 plus were invited to submit full proposals. And at the end of the whole process, including site visits and reverse site visits and everything that goes through with it, only 4 were funded, including CBB. So you can see that the odds are against you pretty much no matter where you're applying for funding. There will always be far more applicants than can be awarded dollars. And that's why the perfection of what you write is something you really have to strive for. It needs to, everything you do is a reflection of the quality of the work that you're going to do, that they're going to fund you to do. So, you know, when you have scarce research dollars, it's super important that they are, that they can, excuse me, that they can award those funds to the people who are most deserving of that and who are doing work that they can count on being achieved in the 3 to 5 year award period. So the feedback makes you better idea is that writing is a scientific exercise just like your research, and it requires peer review. Everyone wants you to be successful. So please take constructive criticism seriously, but not personally. Nobody's trying to hurt your feelings. Some people are going to be super blunt, but everyone has the idea in mind that they want you to win. So keep that in mind, because it's hard to get rejected, especially when you've been so successful throughout your academic careers. Then you're going to start getting rejections, but those are not designed to discourage you. They're designed to make you better. So please view it as that. If you hear the same feedback repeatedly, you know, people keep reviewing your stuff and you keep getting the same kind of feedback, then that's a red flag that there's something that you need to change, or you may need to get help changing it. So start asking people, you know, I keep getting this feedback, but I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. Please ask, you know, there's lots of people like me, and there's people at your graduate schools that can help you with these things. And I encourage you to take advantage of that. Work on one paragraph at a time if you have to with an editor to make sure that you're getting what it is about sentence structure or impact words or emphasis words in sentences that will make your writing stronger. And that way, once you've learned this, I promise you, writing is one of those skills that once you're good at it, it will reduce the amount of time you will have to invest in writing in the future. It's really, it's kind of like compound interest. You know, you take the time now to invest in learning this skill, and then eventually it's going to pay off multifold. So that's my strong advice in all of this. I'm going to pause for a second and just ask if there's any questions that anybody has right now. Okay, hearing none, I will continue. So the Heilemeyer Catechism is a long-standing kind of proposal Bible, I guess, that was created at DARPA. And they, the Heilemeyer, the guy that wrote this, was trying to help people understand what it is that a proposal should do, what it should say. So he came up with all this list of questions, and I encourage you to think about this. Pretty much no matter what you're writing, you will need to answer these questions. So what are you trying to do? You need to articulate your objectives using absolutely no jargon. You should be able to talk about your research to your mom, to your cousin, to somebody who doesn't know what you're doing, so that they can understand what it is that you do. You really should be able to explain it to anybody. And no jargon is the key to that. How is it done today, and what are the limits of the current practice? So basically, that's your state of the science. What does the literature review say? This is what everybody's doing, but here's the limitation of that, and here's how I'm going to bridge that gap. That's where you start talking about what's new in your approach and why do you think you'll be successful. And going back to that early slide, you have to be able to tell me why you are the person to solve it. What's unique about you? What's your expertise that's going to enable you to solve these problems? And of course, pretty much the most important question is, who cares? So if you're successful in doing what you're proposing, what difference will it make? So you never want to have somebody read what you've written about your project and say, so what? So what is a dangerous question for you. You need to always have addressed it in your writing. So please think about that and ask your reviewers to comment on that. Do you care about this? Does this sound like something that other people would care about? Is it important? And what are the risks? So if you're not successful, or if a piece of your experiment doesn't work, or if you have objectives that build on each other, what happens if the first one doesn't work? Do you have contingencies for that? Are there other risks in the field, other potential innovations that could happen that would obviate what you're doing? So think about all of those potential risks to your research, and then have a contingency plan for how you would deal with them when you write up a proposal. How much will it cost? As I mentioned earlier, budgeting is difficult and it requires practice. So, try to see if you can get insight into that through your mentors about how they think through creating budgets and how they conceive of what are the resources that are needed to do certain things, because it will really be important later. Obviously, many of you were bid on your advisor's grants, and so they bid in for a graduate student or for a postdoc. So that has a certain cost, and it also limits what other things you can be funded to do. So try to get insight into that now while you have this great opportunity. You also have to be able to give a timeline of some sort. You need to be able to say, I'm going to accomplish this work in this timeline. You're going to have probably milestones that you're going to be working toward. You may have go, no-go decisions sometimes in your work. There's a lot of things, but basically it's a project management exercise. So what are your tasks? How long will they take over your project period? How much will they cost per year? That helps you gauge whether your timeline is effective or accurate or not, is how it affects your budget. So think about all those things in a holistic way, because it all fits into this big picture, and they should match. Your technical proposal should match to your budget, so that it looks like you really understood what you were proposing to do and how much that was going to cost. And finally, what are the midterm and final exams to check for success? So basically, this can be your evaluation of whether or not you met your objectives. And that can be done in 100 different ways. It depends on the research that you're doing. But think about that. How do you know when you've been successful? What does that look like? What's the outcome that you are expecting? What's the end game that you're working toward? All of that kind of thing. So this is the sum total of what a proposal should, all the questions that a proposal should answer. And I encourage you to keep this printed out, post it someplace in your office, just so you're always thinking about how you will answer these questions about your work. So then we get to, how do you even find funding opportunities? Well, that's a good question. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. Most of your universities are going to have funding databases of some sort. It could be Grant Forward, it could be Pivot, it could be, I can't even think of the other ones now, but it could be one of those. Many of them are very simple. Most universities have a license agreement with one of those companies, and you can type in search words, keywords, and it'll come up with a list of potential funding opportunities that match what you'll do. You can also go to your sponsored research or sponsored programs website. Cornell has one, that's where I work, and we do have databases that you can search. You can also Google it. Honestly, oftentimes that's a really effective way of doing things, is just to Google and see what you come up with in your area of research. And the last really important one is grants.gov. And grants.gov is the warehouse of all of the federal opportunities that are available. And you can do keyword searches, you can search on agencies, you can search on, again, keywords for the research. And I think you can also search on like who you are. So you can search for like training grants or fellowships or things like that. So there's actual subcategories that you can select to narrow the funding opportunities search that you're doing. But there are people, I promise you there are people at your colleges, they could also be in your grad school, who would be able to help you learn about how to do effective searches for funding opportunities. So what do you look for in a funding opportunity? Well, first thing is, as we've been talking about, you want to have plenty of time to pursue something. The way that deadlines work in the federal government is by law, they have to give you, I think they have to give you 45 days to respond. Some agencies give you 60, some only give you 30, which is really, really frustrating, but it does happen. So how does that work when you try to plan 6 or 8 months in advance? Well, you need to be aware of which ones are annual cycles. So if you know that, for instance, many of you, if you go into academia, you may pursue an NSF career or a DOE Young Investigator grant or a DOD Young Investigator award. All of those have essentially the same deadline every year. So you know what time of year you need to be preparing for. And so if you're going to do your NSF career, you want to start planning in January or February for your July submission. It's just really important to get that funding landscape and understanding of what's out there. And I know on the Cornell website, we have some postings of when, like what time of year certain things are competed. So just plan ahead and develop a plan around when you think you might apply for certain things and run it by a mentor to see if it makes sense. Sometimes funding opportunities will have eligibility requirements. That could be time since your PhD was granted. It could be no more than 10 years from your PhD. It could also be you need to be within the first 2 to 3 years of your appointment as a tenure track professor. They can also be citizenship requirements. Some are fine with international, like some US funders are fine with international competitors, others are not. So you have to read the fine print in the proposal opportunity to make sure. And then there are also diversity grants that are out there. Some of them will be for women, for certain underrepresented groups, but those are all specified in the grant opportunity itself. So you'll see a section called eligibility and you'll read all about it and you'll know whether it's something that you can apply for. And if you're unclear, you can always ask your sponsored programs office and they can help you understand that better. Then you want to look at the application guidelines. So basically what that means is read the solicitation. Don't apply for something that you've not read. I cannot stress that strongly enough. Read the directions. It's really important. And be sure that the research focus, particularly if it's a foundation, make sure that the research focus is in line with their research focus and mission is in line with what you're proposing, because you want to be able to tailor it to what they're looking for. Keeping in mind that the funder does not exist to help you fund your research. You exist to help them achieve their mission and goals. So try to keep that in mind that, because I do hear sometimes, well, I got to find somebody who wants to fund this research. It really isn't that. It's more, I have this research idea. I wonder if that's in line with somebody's goals, because really that's how it works. It's not, they don't exist to give us money, sadly. So the stages of grant writing and submission. So this is the really high level stages. First, you find the funding opportunity or graduate fellowship. Then you prepare your application according to the guidelines and your university's policy, whatever those may be. Then you have the proposal reviewed, and then it's submitted by the appropriate department or university officials. So basically, most times when you're submitting a grant, the university is submitting it on your behalf. So they have to certify that the university will abide by all of the requirements or restrictions that funder lays out in the solicitation. So please be aware of that. You won't be submitting something, there's a few exceptions to that, but most of the time you're going to be submitting to through your university, your university's Office of Sponsored Programs or Research. So you have to give them time to review your application as well. I have a few slides on the Graduate Research Fellowship Program that some of you either may be already on or are interested in applying for. And I've included the basic instructions for how the fellowship works. But basically, it provides you with 3 years of support during your graduate education when you can demonstrate that you have the potential for significant advancements in STEM or STEM education. So you can apply for one while you are pursuing full-time research as a graduate student. So I've included the program page for the GRFP. The newest solicitation is linked here. The due dates for this year's competition are included here. But again, this is a rolling thing. So there'll be a new solicitation with new due dates that'll be announced. And you can get on the NSF listserv to get those updates if you're interested in pursuing this. And they also have a list of FAQs that are super useful to read. They have a webinar posted about it, so you can read more, or you can attend the webinar or view the webinar that's been posted about how it works. There's also an external website, the last thing I've linked there, because the GRFP is actually run external to NSF, even though it's their program. So they have tutorials and all kinds of information about how you go about applying. And the last thing is the PAPPG. The NSF people call it the PAPG, but I really hate saying it that way. I don't know, it sounds creepy to me, so I still call it the PAPPG. But that is the Bible for how you apply for NSF grants. It gives you all of the instructions, it explains every part of an application, what it means, how you fill it out, what the restrictions are, etc. So I encourage you to download a copy and keep it somewhere on your desktop and refer to it frequently when you are actually writing something for NSF. Finally, there's some special programs for postdocs that, in this case, these are ones from NSF. And so all of these are special programs and fellowships in areas that may be related to what you're doing in CBB. So I encourage you to explore those if you're interested in doing a postdoc, and just read up. And that way you can start to talk to people in those divisions. You can reach out to program officers, talk to them about your interests, and see if you're a good fit for the fellowship opportunities that are out there. And I just want to encourage all of you to really take advantage of the resources that you have while you're at a university. You have access to libraries and librarians. You have access to colleagues of every conceivable type, and all of them are interested in your success. So please do reach out and get help when necessary, or even not when necessary. Just ask people what their ideas are. What do they think about what you're doing? And just talk to people as much as you can about what you're doing. And that way we can help you improve and be successful much more quickly than it would be otherwise. That's all the slides I have. If you would like to ask any questions of any kind, I am absolutely open to hearing them. So like I said, you can chat, or you can raise hand, or I don't think we have the raise hand thing, but no, we don't. So yeah, feel free to jump in and ask any questions you might have. Maybe even turn on your video if you're going to ask a question. Yes, Richard. That's really cute. What is that? It's like a little hand clap.
Just thanking you for the nice talk. So I don't actually. Thank you.
So Carmel, I have a question.
Yes.
You helped us a lot with the renewal. In your experience, what are the things that you see that you have to send reports back for in particular?
Yeah, so usually when people write, the thing I most often have to go back to them for is, why are you telling me all of this? In other words, there's usually a lot of buildup to get to the point. And in proposal writing, you want to start with the most important thing. In newspaper reporting, they used to call that "don't bury the lead." So basically, I want you to tell me what you're going to tell me, and then you're going to tell me what you were going to tell me, and then you're going to tell me again what you told me. So the writing is much less about, don't give me a page of background. First, tell me what it is that you do, how you do it, and then you can apply it to a problem that you want to solve. So I guess basically it's, give me that big picture view rather than starting with the minutia. And that's probably the first thing to think about. And it's also what you would do if you were talking to a relative or a friend about your research when they don't have any background in your research. You would say, well, what I do, well, it's kind of like this. And you give them an analogy, or you give them some high level view so that they can have a basic understanding. And then you can say, and then, like I tell people, I help faculty get research grants. That's what I do. But there's a lot that goes into that. There's tons of smaller variables that go into that. And then I can explain it in more detail if people are interested, but that gives people a good idea of what it is that I do. So you should be able to give me a real quick sentence or two about your work at a high level, and then you can go into more detail as you get further into your writing. And the other thing that I see a lot is overly complicated sentences. So if you find that your sentence is going on for 6 lines, it's too long. Think about ways that you could shorten it and make it crisper so that what you write is easily understandable in chunks, because most people just don't have the attention span to keep a lot of variables in mind. So if you're writing a complex, compound sentence with a bunch of different ideas all strewn together and semicolons and dashes and all of this kind of thing, it becomes really difficult for your reader to understand your writing. So those are probably the first 2 that are really a challenge. And writing for excitement. You want to be writing in a compelling way, which may be very different from writing for publication. That's a different style. So, proposals are, and even your reports should be more of a sales document, essentially. It's more like, this is really cool, and this is what I did, and this is why it's important, so that anybody can be excited about what you do. And I do want to add, because this is actually super important, when you're talking about funding from the federal government, your research, which means your progress reports, your proposals, your abstracts, all of that stuff is publicly available. So you need to be able to justify if a congressperson comes to you and says, why did we fund this research? That happens a lot. It's happened, especially in the last 10 years or so. There's been a lot of researchers dragged in front of Congress to justify a research project that they were funded to do. And you need to be able to do that, which means you need to be able to talk to people who are not scientists, and you have to be able to explain to them why it was worth taxpayer dollars going to fund your work. So that's a real bottom line in federal government funding. It's all about taxpayer dollars and the scarcity of those, and why your research should be funded in that very deep pool.
On the note of keeping the attention of the reviewers, I'm thinking in terms of how many sentences long a paragraph is, how frequently you have figures, what colors you use in your figures. Like, you want it to be vibrant, but you don't want it to be like rainbow vomit.
Well, So there are probably certain colors that are less professional than others. But in the center grants that I've done, I use a lot of color. A graphic per page is a really nice thing to try to strive for. But yes, you're right. You don't want to go crazy with color, and you don't want to have, everything bolded and underlined and italicized. I mean, you have to use your discretion, but that's also why you have people review it so that you can get their feedback on what you should be emphasizing. When I edit, I will often bold certain phrases that I know were in the RFP that I want to make sure the reviewers see that you've addressed. I may pull certain things out and put them in text boxes so that they are highlighted as an example of what you've done. I may ask for photographs. I may ask for, slides of your work, or, any visual representation of your research. All of that, you should really think about how you're going to include, and give yourself a lot of options so that you have a library of figures that you can possibly use. And where possible, try to draw your process so that people can see in a graphic representation what you're going to describe in the text, because some people are visual, some people are very verbal, and so you want to be able to appeal to a wide variety of of reviewers.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of chat questions here. First one is, how does the proposal structure and content change for faculty position applications where there are fewer specific guidelines for the research proposal? Is it wise to include specific timelines, midpoint checks, etc.? Oh, what a good question. And I'm going to definitely call on some of the faculty who are here, because of course I've never applied for a faculty position. So I've helped people write their research statements in the past, and sometimes I've reviewed teaching philosophy types of descriptions, but timelines and midpoint checks. If any of the faculty want to jump in, that would be super helpful. Well, while you're thinking about that, proposal structure and content, I think it's fair to say that the guidelines I gave you for writing in a comprehensive way about your work, in a way that'll generate excitement and will show your research strategy over time, what you're hoping to achieve pre-tenure, is certainly a good idea. You want to show what you've accomplished in your postdoc or in graduate school, and then give them detail. But Richard, you've come on. So is Stephen.
Yeah, I'm happy to say, I think Stephen is also on, he might say something too, right? Yeah. About the faculty application. I mean, when it comes to that, it's certainly very important to talk to your advisor and any other faculty in your department to get input. I'm happy to say a few things right now, but that kind of feedback really, really helps. I mean, that application process is obviously different than the grant proposals, because you're looking for effectively a proposal for the next 20, 30, 40 years. Right, so what you want to describe, what's required is typically an application letter, an extended CV with all your publication and presentation, and then the most important, or two of the very important documents, are a research and a teaching statement. And so that research statement can be considered a little bit like a set of proposals. They got to be brief. Nobody wants to read 40 pages of research something. You want to be concise and want to, again, just like Carmel said, capture the audience by the time you pass the first couple of pages. So summarizing things, then go into detail. Then if you want to provide more detail later on in some technical description, that's good. And then the other advice I generally have when it comes to the research statement is, you want to describe both what you want to do when you walk in the door for the first year or two, what your first paper might be looking like with your students and your group you're developing, and then what's your long-term vision 5-10 years down the line is. If you get that across on like 5 pages, you've got a shot, you've got a foot in the door. And I see also in the chats here the little comment on the 100-to-1 ratio for proposals. it's about the same as for faculty positions. As these ratios, unfortunately, are not favorable. But then again, you do also have to realize that you're hopefully already in the top thirds of that group, and then it's maybe not quite as bad.
Okay, can I jump in?
Please.
Hi, this is Steve in Chicago. I have comments on two things. First, about the proposals. You really want to distinguish your ideas and why you can execute them from everybody else, those other 100 people, or even the 1,000 people in different fields. That is, nobody wants to hire the 10th person to measure the spectrum of H2 at 1% level higher, unless it really matters. You know, it's going to change the nature of science. So I'd say what we look for here, and I've helped hire a vast number of faculty here, is creativity. It's just number one. And you have to look professional, as Richard said, but it has to, you really want to stand out in your idea. And you don't want to, everybody knows if you're coming from Cornell or one of these places that you've got the chops. I mean, I think the real question is, how do you distinguish yourself, not just from your cohort you're applying to, but from, you know, the other people in the field? You know, what's the added benefit? Why are you going to be the new star on the scene, or at least a real player? And I think that's very important. So I think the creativity and the ideas are as important as capturing their fancy in the first 5 pages, as was said previously. So that's one comment I had. If you really want to know, I think in things like the NSF, funding levels are about 20% in programmatic funding. So centers are, I mean, these are real prizes. So this is a real testament to Richie and everybody. But 20% is a realistic number for, you know, physics at NSF or chemistry at NSF. If I have one more minute, another comment. I wanted to say something also about when you're writing these. There's one thing that gets me a little upset occasionally when I see my own students or others here, and that is, you have to go for it. And what I mean by that is, you may think, what's in vogue? This is about applying for grants. You know, there are a lot of calls for applied science, or war on cancer, or war on accelerator physics, you know, this. But, you know, you've worked so hard to reach this point where you want that job, and you're very close to getting it. I think it's most important that you be true to yourself. You know, if there's an idea that you want to propose that's a little off of what you think is in vogue, propose it. You know, otherwise, what is the point of working so hard all these years to get that assistant professorship or a staff position in a DOE lab if you're not doing what you really want to do? And so I think, and that'll come out if you reach the interview phase anyway, but occasionally you see people, I had a discussion with one of our new colleagues here, remain nameless, where the person said, oh, I'm going to write on this for my first proposal because, you know, it's solid, it's fundable, and then I can really get to what I want to do. And I said, stop, you know. So that's maybe, I hope you don't mind me saying this. I see a smile there from our speaker, but
I agree with you.
well, yeah, all too often, I mean, I get actually a little agitated when somebody says, you know, there's a proposal. The other thing is that, you know, when you write these 25-page proposals, I think on page 17 in a paragraph, you can certainly put in some creative way, a thing that you want to do that's slightly off of 1 sigma from the topic of the proposal. And if it's funded and it's in there, it's perfectly legit to change science with that 1 paragraph. So those are some tools of the trade. They've served a lot of people I know well for all these years. So that's my wisdom or lack thereof. Okay.
I love it. And jumping off from that, so when I talked earlier about identifying risks and having contingencies, that's often where you can put in those kind of blue sky ideas that are a little bit crazy, but you could try it if what you were proposing didn't work, or it's just an alternative approach to something. Those are all legitimate. And if you choose to write something like an NSF career proposal, you can have a number of different thrusts that your research could take, and you might be pursuing one particular project for the career, but you might say, you know, and if there's, you know, if there is time, I may pursue this little bit too, which again, could be a little more creative, a little edgier. But I totally agree that You have to be able to demonstrate innovation. You have to be able to demonstrate why you are the person who can do it, why no one else can, if ideally. You know, what do you think you're bringing to solving a problem of some sort? So I totally agree. Do not try to get funding just because you need to get funding for something and then you can do what you want. That's a real losing battle. You want to just make your ideas as strong and compelling as possible and find the funder who is willing to take a risk. And there are many that will fund high risk, high reward research. So you should be encouraged to pursue that and not shy away from it. Because safety, when it comes to grant writing, is a sure way of not getting funded. You need to take chances and be bold. And I assure you that's how CBB came into existence. It's bold, and it's the right group of people to do it. So make sure you focus on why why are you the right person? The other thing in the chat that as part of that second question about the examples, yes, NSF, as Stephen was saying, the average funding is somewhere around 20%. It can be as low as 12 in some divisions. It really just depends. So, but you can find that out when you talk to program officers. And when it's things like business-focused grants, like for SBIRs, lower barriers to entry. I don't know if I can categorize it in those terms, but those are funded when the partnership is right, when the technology is right. But those grants are just as difficult to write. I mean, they're just as difficult to make compelling. So I don't want to say that there's a lower barrier to entry because they're apples and oranges. They're very different types of proposals, and they're funding different things. So I don't know if any of the faculty who may have been part of an SBIR, if they had a spin out or anything like that. If anybody's got feedback, I'd love to hear it. But all right, I'm going to assume that nobody has. Does anybody else have any questions, or anybody else who wants to contribute anything? Let me ask a different question. Did the feedback on the research progress reports that you all wrote, was that helpful? Or did you have any questions about what I might have been getting at? I just want to make sure that that was heard so that when you write your next progress report, it's a better representation of your work. And as I said, many of you did a fantastic job. I want to help improve the ones that are, that maybe were a little underdeveloped. They just needed more content. So any comments or questions about any of that?
Well, Carmel, I wanted to say thank you, and I appreciate you, and I should share with everyone, because I didn't before this, that I did share, I should have told all the students that I shared their annual reports with you, but I would like to, you'd given me some feedback that maybe there are ways we can improve the questions that we ask in our annual report that will make it more useful for the students in terms of their writing, as well as for me, when I'm pulling that information together for the annual report that we then send to NSF. So first of all, I apologize for everyone for not sharing that. I shared your information with Carmel. But I'm hoping that you'll take some time maybe to work with me before our next set of annual reports to help me craft that so it's a little bit better, if that's something that you are willing to do.
Of course, I'm happy to help you with anything you need, Joan. I think that I tried in my advice, the 3 slides about what I noticed. Most of it was not about what you could do to ask better questions. It was that questions get answered, because there were just too many reports that had missing information or unclear about what the contribution was. And as Joan is saying, those reports are used to generate the bigger reports that actually go to NSF. So the more descriptive and compelling you can describe the work that you're doing, the better the entire center will be, because all of that gets reported up the chain. So, so you don't want to minimize what you're doing. You want to explain why it was important and what the achievements were, and make it easier for Joan and Richie to then, you know, put together a report that's going to go up to NSF and be looked at. Because we, you know, the last thing you want is for the person who's funding you to be less than satisfied with a report that you put forward. They want to see what's happening, what's being achieved, and you're doing the work. So tell us about it. You know, if you can practice now being excited about what you're doing and how it's contributing to the bigger project, that's a good thing for you. So, but yeah, Joni, we can definitely go through it in more detail, but I think that you're asking the right questions. I think it's, maybe there just needs to be an understanding among all of the participants that these actually are important and they should be attended to like you would any other important academic writing that you're doing. Because it is getting published, in a manner of speaking. So it's still contributing to what's happening with CBB.
Thanks.
So I have a question about our reports. Do you think that we tend to use too much of a technical language? Sometimes, you know, acronyms or, you know, things that are not clear to even to the audience of the CBB collaboration that is very broad.
That's a good question, Alice. Yeah, there were times when I was reading something and I wasn't sure how it fit into the larger experiment or objectives that were trying to be achieved. And some of that was because it was just jargony, or it was explaining a process. But again, I wasn't sure if the student was actually doing that process, and you're telling me about it because this is what you did. So yeah, if you can minimize jargon, or at least if you use acronyms, absolutely define them, but strive to put it in terms that that show progress toward the larger goal. So depending on which of are they tracks? Now I can't remember. The different research areas, what's the word? Now I can't remember. Themes, thank you. Yeah, so depending on which theme your work is under, try to relate it to that theme. You know, what is it, how are you fitting into that big picture? Because that's a real skill to learn now, how to write to that big idea. So there's going to be a lot of times in your future where you're going to be writing one section of a proposal for a big grant that you're not the principal investigator of, but you need to be able to convey excitement about your part of the research. And it might only be a paragraph out of a 25-page document, but it's important that it be written in a way that anybody can understand it. So, so yes, please write clearly, write more than you need to. Sometimes that's okay. It's a report. You can write, and many of you wrote beautiful descriptions of what you did, and I totally understood, and there were pictures and graphics, and I was like, wow, this is impressive. This is somebody who's practiced writing, and it comes through. So if you're not practicing writing when you have the chance, when it's really, really, really important, when you're trying to get money or you're trying to get a position, it's going to come through that you didn't take that time to develop that skill. And like I said, I assure you it pays off. So practice, and you can always run it by your mentors or your colleagues and just say, you know, hey, this sound any good? You know, do you get it? Do I need to say something more? So, you know, it's okay. And you can do that if you write ahead, you know, rather than 15 minutes before it's due.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. It's been very useful.
Thanks, Alice. Good luck.
Thanks.
Anybody else? This wonderful sea of some faces and some blank screens.
Well, Carmel, I just want to say thank you very much. I appreciate you pulling this together for us, and I certainly appreciate all of your help over the last year. You've just
My
been
pleasure.
amazing.
I can't wait to hear final word, and I know everybody's fingers and toes are crossed, and but it's looking good, and it was a great proposal, and you all are doing amazing work, and you should be really proud of your contributions to the center and the center's goals and what you're doing to move the science in a really exciting direction. So be as excited about it as I am. I think the Center for Bright Beams is just doing amazing stuff. So you all are part of that story, and you should take the time to really, really write it down from that perspective. You know, what is it that you're doing that's making this another potential 5-year center? You're paving the way for the students that are going to follow you in the center. So everything that you're doing is going to make it easier and better for the next group that comes through. And hopefully if you go into academia, you'll do the same for your graduate students and postdocs, and you'll teach them everything that you've learned. And in that way, we all make it better for everybody. And then the science can flourish, and you won't have to spend a lot of time struggling. I want to reduce the struggle for everyone. So yeah, I wish everybody tremendous luck in everything that you do. I hope you achieve all of your research goals and your professional dreams. And you know, if you have any questions, you can always funnel them through Joan, or you can find me. I'm the only Carmel at Cornell, I think. And there might be another one, but I'm pretty easy to find if you need to. Yeah, so thank you for your attention. I'm really happy to have had this opportunity, and good luck. And I'll send the slides to you, Joan, so you can post them on your server.
Indigo. Will do. All right. Thank you, Carmel.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye. And I will see everyone else tomorrow. So we start, I think, at 11 a.m. So I will see you then. So go enjoy your evening.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.